I, Mutiny, take the privilege to extend a warm welcome to all present here for the DIBRU College Annual Lecture, and at the same time request all of you to keep your mobile phones in silent mode. We have a brief felicitation now. First, we would like to felicitate the head of this institution, our principal, Dr. DIBRU COLLEGE, and I request Dr. Mutiny Doctor to felicitate Sir with a full answer. She will be assisted by Dr. Chancellor. We would now like to request our principal to felicitate our invited speaker, and in doing so, he will be assisted by Mrs. Judy Fukan and Dr. Chancellor. Professor Syiemlieh will be felicitated with a full answer. A select sabar made from part silk, a traditional waistcoat made from very silk, and a bouquet of flowers. Thank you, sir, and thank you, Dr. Mutiny. Light fades away darkness and symbolize knowledge and wisdom. To make this program a success and for seeking the choicest blessings for the same, I would request our invited speaker to kindle the lamp. Dr. Mutiny Doctor will assist in lighting the lamp. Associate Professor and Head, Department of Sanskrit, Welsh College. Accompanying her on the musical instrument tool is Sri Prashanta Kumar Bora, Associate Professor from the Department of Economics of this college. May I now request our Principal Sir to deliver his welcome address.
Honorable Chief Guest and star attraction of this program, Professor Reid Syiemlieh, esteemed citizens of DIBRU, my faculty colleagues, my dear students, media persons, ladies and gentlemen. Very good morning to all of you. I am extremely happy and feel honored to welcome all of you to this annual lecture on a very interesting topic, Northeast India Mutiny, Freedom Struggle and Integration, which will be delivered none other than our chief guest. This annual lecture program is done annually, and it has been the part of the culture of DIBRU College. Professor Reid Syiemlieh, who received many accolades from national and international firm, took interest in the history of India throughout his career. In his capacity, he held various positions in Northeastern Hill University. He was the professor and head of the Department of History. He was the Dean of Student Welfare, Proctor, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Controller of Examinations, Director, College Development Council, except the position of the Vice Chancellor. In addition to this, he held many positions in different organizations. He was the Vice Chancellor of Rajiv Gandhi University. He was the Honorary Director of Indian Council of Social Science Research, Northeastern Regional Center, Shillong. He was a council member of Indian Council of Historical Research. He was picked up by President as the member of the Union Public Service Commission, and finally, the most coveted post, Chairman of the Indian Public Service Commission. Professor Reid Syiemlieh authored 10 books and so many articles in respect of history of Northeast India. I did not have go through all his books and the articles, but I have one book with me. That is the Age of the Empire, 4 British plans for Northeast India from 1941 to 1947. I got to know a lot of things when I have gone through this book. How the Northeast India brought under the British colonial rule step by step. It started with annexation of Garo foothills along Moymansingh and Gwalpara in the year 1822. This was followed by annexation of Assam in the year 1826 after signing of Yandavu Treaty, and it is followed the annexation of Jaintias, then Khasi Hills, and so on and on like this. This is a very quite interesting about the Northeast India. How Northeast India got administered by British people. How was the political activity of the hill tribes of Northeast India under British imperialism? What were the policies of the British officers for the hill people of Northeast India? What were the views of the hill people towards partition and independence? I got to know a lot of things. The hill areas were categorized as excluded areas and partially excluded areas. Excluded areas included Naga Hills and Lusai Hills, now it is Mizoram, and it was governed by, under the executive control of Assam governor. Partially excluded areas included Garu, Khasi, Jaintias, and Khasi Hills. It was also under the executive control of governor, but have ministerial representation. There was also a third area, which once inaccessible and a remote stretch of land. This is Nepal Northeast Frontier Agency, now this is Arunachal Pradesh. It was inhabited by Abors, Nishi, Galu, Sedrukpen, Monpa, etc., etc. It was unadministered at that time. As the official term went, a non-regulation of administration operated in this region. I also came to know that political consciousness or political activity started during 20th century. It was started with the setting up of Jaintia Darbar in 1900. The participation of Hill people in the war in between 1914 and 1918 exposed these people to the outside world far away from their home. Naga political activity began with the setting up of Naga Club in 1918. It was followed by hectic political activity by the Khasis. After the setting up of Khasi National Council and the Federation of Khasi States. This was followed by, in 1946, setting up of Garu Nationalist Council that brought all the Garu people under one umbrella, and setting up of Mizo Union for the same purpose. I also came to know that a secret plan was conceived in the later part of the British administration, and this was discussed in the highest level of British administration to set up a crown colony comprising of hill people of Assam, hill people of Northeast India, and the tribal people of Burma. But this never came into reality because of various reasons. One of the reasons is that it was ill-timed and conceived too late to establish a protectorate of their own. However, the British people put their mind in studying the inhabitants of the hill people of Northeast India in a very organized manner. In his book, I have found that the poor British officers left very important notes and important accounts with regard to the hill people of Northeast India. They were Robert Reid was the governor of Assam, followed by Andrew Clow, he was also the governor of Assam. Then James Mills was the advisor of governor of Assam. Philip Adams, he was also the advisor to the governor of Assam. The main theme of all the accounts is to preserve the tradition, culture, and language of the hill people. And all are agree with the view that all the hill people must look after their needs by self-administration of their villages. It has become an issue now, and it continues to resonate. And all the four accounts, as I have told, as I have already mentioned, all the four accounts provide historical context to the confusion of policy that has bound different successive governments in the independent India. After 72 years of independence, Northeast India still remains an enigma to most of the people of other parts of India. A region that is predominantly tribe is waiting for peace and tranquility. Demand for separate states from every identifiable tribal group echoing all over the hills all along. So we are fortunate to have the person, a special person, someone who is very special. We are sure that you will enjoy his analytical lecture as much as he will be enjoying speaking to you. I will wind up my welcome address by using one word. In his book, while acknowledging friends, relatives, family members, and different institutions for their help and support in bringing out his book, he used the word Khublai. Isn't it? Khublai in Khasi means God bless you. I, on behalf of DIBRU College family, say with high regard, Khublai, Professor Reid Syiemlieh. Thank you, sir.
Our principal is a very well-read person, and that was clearly evident in his welcome address. Thank you, sir. The moment that we have all been waiting for has finally arrived. Distinguished audience, we are having a great opportunity to listen to the lecture by a renowned, knowledgeable speaker. I am profusely elated to take this opportunity to introduce before you our speaker for this event. Professor Reid Syiemlieh is an eminent historian and academician of Northeast India. As an astute researcher, he is credited for the discovery of the date of death and the last days of U Tirot Sing Syiem, the Khasi Chief of NongKhlaw, who resisted British colonial expansion. He also located in Kolkata the grave of Thomas Jones, the Welsh missionary, who had first arrived in Khasi Hills. He is a recipient of numerous renowned international fellowships, which include the Charles Wallace Grant for research in the United Kingdom, India-France Cultural Exchange for research in Paris, and the Senior Fulbright Scholarship for research in the US. In February 2019, he was awarded with the honorary D.Litt degree by the University of Science and Technology, Meghalaya, for his contribution to academics. Some of the well-read books authored by him include British Administration in Meghalaya, Policy and Pattern, Layers of History, Essays on the Khasi Jaintias, Survey of Research and History of Northeast India from 1970 to 1990. These are just some of the 10 books that he has authored till date. And interestingly, his 10th book, titled Faith and Hope, has been published just the day before yesterday. Among various eminent posts held by him, Professor Syiemlieh held the position of Pro-Vice Chancellor of Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, Vice Chancellor of Rajiv Gandhi University, Itanagar, and the prestigious position of the Chairman of Union Public Service Commission. With a long list of his achievements and glory, may I now have the honor of requesting the invited speaker of DIBRU College Annual Lecture 2019, Professor Reid Syiemlieh, to deliver his lecture. Sir.
This gets in the way because I want to see the young people. Okay. Dr. Jitu Borgohain, Principal, DIBRU College. Dr. Mayuri, who has been so kind to have been in touch with me this last few months. and to have arranged my visit here. Faculty of the college, students, particularly the school students who have come in large numbers over here, will you sit through 1 hour and listen to me? Okay. The press, invitees, friends. I have my dear friend Shri Sridhar Datta here, and senior citizens. I hope you will have the patience to listen me out, because I have prepared this lecture very carefully over the last few months and updated it. I had given this lecture at Osmania University, but it was with a different idea. People in mainland India know so little of the Northeast. I thought it would be good to speak to them on events of the past in this region which they are not familiar about. And I'm not too sure how familiar you are with your history, because history these days is not a very attractive subject. But believe me, every day you talk about yesterday. Every day you take a photograph of 5 or 6 years ago, you are recalling history. You are taking out the significant events in your own lives and the lives of the people around you, and it will have an effect on you. So don't despise history. Make it part of your life. Greetings from my home, Shillong, from the people of the hills I love dearly, from Assam, which is my birthplace. Thank you for the invitation to come to DIBRU College and to deliver this annual lecture. I have decided to speak on 3 topics. And these 3 topics I had taught in the university and college over many years, but I have updated it to very more recent publications. I'm going to talk today on the freedom movement, but before that, the Mutiny of 1857, the events leading to that event, to the effects of the revolt. Then I will speak on the freedom struggle, which many Assamese authors have written about, and perhaps I'm not the person to speak on this theme. And then to talk about an integrative principle. I'm trying to link 3 events. History is about causation. We link up one event with another. They're not piecemeal. And therefore I have taken 3 strands of history. 3 strands of history, and weaving them together, more like a weaver, putting them through the looms, bringing out a presentation today. After the Treaty of Yandabu, 1826, which was witnessed by very few, yet affected many, what was of most significance in the history of the region were the events leading to the course and the aftermath of the revolt of 1857. History generally ascribes the origins of 1857 unrest to unrest in the military establishment in Bengal, in Barakpur. But the event actually took place and started on Sunday, 10th May 1857 at Meerut in North India, in a cantonment there. Please note that it was a Sunday, right? And it was very easy on that day for the sepoys to do what they did. The events of the Mutiny of 1857 are known to the history students of this region because you are taught it. You are taught about Barakpur, you talked about Meerut, you talk about Rani of Jhansi, and all the others who participated. But how much do you know of the mutiny in the Northeast? There really wasn't an outbreak, as I shall say, but there were stirrings of unrest, and stirrings of unrest itself is an indication of discontent. The reason for this is that the history of Northeast India has not been integrated into the history of India. The sun first shines on the Northeast, but it does not radiate in the way that we would want to in the spread of the Northeast history into Indian texts, and I shall be mentioning this again. Research has shown that the region was caught up with the rest of the country in reacting to British rule. The literature of 1857 uprising in North India should enable historians writing on the history to incorporate the history of the region into broader histories. For instance, when India observed the anniversary of 1857, the Indian History Council put together a number of essays on the Mutiny of 1857. And what was very, very striking was that it was not only Bengal and North India that was affected and the middle of India, but even to Tamil Nadu, even to Mumbai and the Northeast. And the ICHR should be credited with a marvelous text that came out. Some months before the Treaty of Yandubu was signed, the British had occupied Assam as far north as Vishwanath. And Assam was taken by default. Assam was not conquered. The Burmese were here and they were expelled, and by default the British took over. There were two Ahom princes who had taken refuge under the British when the Burmese came. Chandrakanta, who was pensioned and removed to Kolyobor. Purandar Sinha was not provided any pension, as it was believed he had considerable wealth. Subsequently, in an experiment, Upper Assam was returned to Purandar Sinha for 5 years between 1833 and 1835. The British were not very sincere in giving that territory, and they very quickly took it back at 1838. After which the British resumed its administration. And among the many effects of colonial rule over Assam, one that may be linked with the origin of the revolt of 1857 in these parts is that the British rule deprived the Ahom nobility of their rule over Assam and the privileges which came with that position. The woes of the nobility was reflected in the sorry condition of the two Ahom princes. Chandrakanta died in 1839, leaving his family in despair and financial straits. Purandar Sinha's condition was relatively better, but he too complained to government to increase his pension, which, when it was eventually granted, he could not enjoy as he passed away in October 1856, a year before the uprising of 1857. The case of the princes and the nobility was taken up by Mani Ram Diwan. Early in his career, he had served with distinction under the British administration. Then followed one misfortune after another. He had to forego the benefits of the Mauza allotted to him by Purandar Sinha, and his tea garden. Very interestingly, he was one of the earliest of the tea planters in Assam. And his tea garden enterprise did not get him the revenue concessions given to European investors. Mani Ram subsequently became the Diwan of Kandapeshwar Sinha, grandson of Purandar Sinha. He petitioned the government on behalf of the princes and the disposed nobility. And he met A.J.M. Mills, who was a judge and who visited Assam in 1853. There's a marvelous report by A.J.M. Mills on Assam. Mani Ram Diwan was in Calcutta in 1857, continuing his campaign to place before the authorities the case of Kandapeshwar and his own when the mutiny erupted. It took a month or more after the mutiny starting in Meerut for that information to come to the Northeast. There was no telegraph, there was no app, WhatsApp for sure, there was no telephone. It had to come by newspaper. and the Calcutta Phoenix Extraordinary, a newspaper from Calcutta, first informed the people in the Northeast about the outbreak of the mutiny in North India. The event, the extant literature on the subject of the unrest of the Brahmaputra Valley shows that Mani Ram Dewan influenced Kandapeshwar to raise the standard of revolt by inciting the sepoys at Jorhat, Guwahati, and Dibrugarh, and also Golaghat. The late historian Amalendu Guha, bless his soul, he's no more, has shown that the attempted uprising in the valley was not without popular support. There was popular support. Had an outbreak occurred, it was written, there could be no doubt that they would have sided with the rebels, the Assam Company recorded. And the Assam Company in 1857 was alarmed by the outbreak of the revolt in Chittagong and asked for a European regiment to come without delay. There was no European detachment of soldiers over here. There was only the Assam Light Infantry and the Sibandi Corps. Very interestingly, details of the uprising of 1857 has come to our notice from a source which was not known for many years. My senior colleague, teacher, and friend, Professor Imdad Hussain at Nehu, had gone on a scholarship to the UK, and in the British Library he chanced upon the diary of George Carter. George Carter was a sergeant of the 2nd Bengal Fusilier at Ambala, and he was transferred to Assam in 1856 on duty with the Assam Light Infantry. He reached Dibrugarh 22nd February 1857, and in his diary he goes into an extraordinary account of the events in Assam. More than any other account of Assam, it is this simple sergeant who put together his notes. But please believe me that his notes also give a very British-centric interpretation. It is not a sensitive approach which you and I would appreciate in putting together an account of the events of 1857, 1858. Kandapeshwar was apprehended in Jorhat with incriminating documents linking him with the intended uprising in Assam. An arrest followed. This was then followed by the arrest of Mani Ram Dewan in Kolkata and a number of his associates in Assam. Mani Ram Dewan was brought to Jorhat, tried and sentenced. And the British were absolutely ruthless. They followed a pattern whenever a person was tried, that on the very same day of their trial they would be hung. It happened to Kyang Nongba and the Khasi Hills. It happened to Mani Ram Dewan over here. And the very sad thing is that Mani Ram Dewan was hung on the trees and trunks of wood that he had intended to build a house. Using that same wood, the gallows were made as a stern example that the British would take steps on anybody who would create problem. Mani Ram Dewan and his associate Piali Barwa were hung on the day of the verdict was delivered 26 February 1858. Kandapeshwar was not brought to trial due to his young age, and because the correspondence produced in the trial of Mani Ram Dewan indicated that he had been drawn into a conspiracy by the Dewan. When news of the mutiny in Meerut reached Chittagong, and Chittagong is in Bangladesh these days, it was very much part of British India at that time. When news of the mutiny at Meerut reached Chittagong in November that year, and you can see it's taken a longer time to reach Chittagong because it's November of 1857, 300 sepoys of the 34th Native Infantry posted in that port town mutiny. You know, the history is a peculiar subject where we only talk about some personalities. We don't talk about the lesser known sepoys. We don't talk about the less unfortunate, right? It is the more prominent of people who come down in history texts. And this is very unfair, I believe. But from Cachar, these soldiers moved towards Manipur, and they were prevented from going to the Lushai Hills by the district administration. They were pursued, and 110 of them were killed by January 1858. Several months later, their numbers increased to 167, and by February the next year, 1858, 185 soldiers were killed. The remnant of the mutineers dispersed. What is sorry about our Indian history is that we are told to read so much of events on mainland India with so little of understanding on the region itself. What I've just said has been brought in great detail by historians of the region, including Edward Gate, Benudhar Sharma, my dear friend Debo Prasad Barwa of Guwahati University, who wrote an article on 1857-1858. Professor Barpujari, the senior Barpujari, H.K. Barpujari, wrote extensively of this event. And so did Shonalata Barwa of DIBRU University. But none of these events feature in Indian history. And this is the sad neglect of the history of Northeast India, that an important event such as 1857 is bypassed, is absolutely bypassed. And poor history students sitting in that corner over there are made to read on everything else other than the Northeast. Word of the disturbed state in Northeast India reached my own Khasi and the Jaintias Hills. The Khasi and the Jaintias Hills had fought against the British in 1829-1833, and one of the leaders in that event was maybe a grand-uncle of mine, U Tirot Sing. He fought against the British. He was captured, tried, sent to Dhaka, and we knew little of him until I had the privilege of researching and locating his details. And he's being brought into the history texts again. The Jaintias Hills, which is the neighboring territory to the Khasi Hills, was annexed in 1835, and the Raja, typical of the British, was pensioned, given a pension, reasonably comfortable pension to live on. But there was seething discontent with the increasing annexation after annexation that was being conducted by the British Governor-Generals. And you know the way in which during Dalhousie's time, the last of these annexations, not the last as I shall mention, but many of these annexations continued. There is correspondence to show that Rajendra Singh, the last of the Jaintia Rajas, indicated to the British that he needed 2,500 soldiers given muskets, and that he would march to Delhi and support the British in their effort. But the British did not give him either the steamer that he wanted to transport these soldiers or the muskets, because the British felt that he would use this against the British themselves. But the Jaintias Hills was also restive, and there were exaggerated rumors of the fall of the British power, and this caused excitement among the Khasi chiefs, particularly the chief of Cherrapunji. Even if there was no revolt in the sense that the soldiers came out onto the streets and in Guwahati or in Dibrugarh or Golaghat, there was seething discontent among two sections of the people of Assam, the displaced nobility and the soldiers. One does not find, for instance, the Raja of Kachar, the former Raja of Kachar, taking advantage of the events in Kachar. Manipur was quiet, but throughout the region there was restlessness of what was happening. And in the aftermath of 1857-1858, the British took very, very, very stern steps to enforce their rule. First, by seeing that the East India Company ceased to govern India and bringing in the Crown's administration of India, and with it all the rules and regulations, and in introducing a number of stern measures in not only in the police and in the army, but even taxing the Indian people, such as the income tax and the house tax that was introduced in the Northeast. In reaction to this, in 1860 and 1862, the Jaintias revolted. There was also a number of peasant revolts in Assam during the aftermath of 1857-1858. But the efforts of the British to take stern action was perhaps sufficient enough for the people of the region to feel that they should be careful in coming up in revolt again. I now move to the freedom struggle. The study of the struggle of independence of oppressed nationalities in Asia and Africa has been a dominant theme in the writing of the history of the last century. Historians write history, rewrite history, and reinterpret history. And you will find in the writing, reinterpretation, and writing of history, historians have one important theme after 1947, and that was the freedom struggle, the freedom movement. This is a recurring theme. When the Indian freedom struggle started to get the attention of the Indian people, it was a question of discontent, seething discontent. But there was no repeat of 1857 in Assam. In fact, in the Assamese response to the discontent that was very large in Assam, it was constitutional, more like it was constitutional in other parts of India, whether it was Bombay, Madras, Pune, or Kolkata, where the Indian National Congress and other associations believed that the only way out of agitating and pressing forth their demands was by constitutional means. But after a period of time, the people of the Northeast, like the people elsewhere in India, also found that the British were not true to their intentions. Queen Victoria, how many years did she rule for? I'm asking the students here. The longest reigning monarch. And perhaps Queen Elizabeth will be going beyond those 60 years that Victoria was on the throne. Queen Victoria in 1858 was known to have made a proclamation that there would be no more annexation, because the annexations had resulted in the discontent of the feudal chiefs. But annexation was completed here in the Northeast, when, for instance, the Garo Hills were annexed in 1873 after a battle at Rongrengri. The Naga Hills in 1866, and after 3 installments of annexation. The Lusha Hills was annexed in 1890. Manipur was restive. In 1891, 5 British officers were killed, and the British sent a three-pronged expedition into Manipur. But the Indian states, which were Tripura, Manipur, and the Khasi states, were very, very carefully watched upon that they would not rise up in arms again. However, much before this period of unrest and the completion of empire, there existed religious and social and economic linkages between the Northeast and mainland India. These linkages go back into antiquity. Buddhism was known to have had its impact in the region and still has an impact on the region. The Hindu tradition is long and profound. Kamakhya and Jaintiapur have been places of religious significance from time past. Assam underwent social and religious revival in the medieval ages, the effect of which are evident today. The impact of Islam was more recent, yet with significant following. All these religious features have had a profound sense of belonging to the larger Indian ethos. Please note that when I'm talking about this ethos, you have an Indian ethos which is an imagined state, and you have a connection of the people of the Northeast into this larger Indian ethos. There were also economic linkages and markets which further added to a sense of belonging the imagined nation. Waterways and settled population made it possible for a large number of linkages to be established. All these have remained and become part of the regional yet distinct variety. I am for regionalism to the extent that if we have to participate in a larger country, the region must be respected. Whatever the region has in its culture, in its politics, and in its essence in language and culture should be treasured and nurtured. The situation was very different in the hill tribes in the region. They lived in isolation for long. Their interaction was largely confined with people around them, over their hills and plains below, with whom there was more of barter or economic relations. The larger states of the valley did not venture up into the hills to have more than cordial relations, with only occasional raids into the hills. It was in this situation that these hills were incorporated into British India. The origins of Indian nationalism go back to Bengal, Maharashtra, Pune, and Mumbai, where the intelligentsia took up the lead to take up the issues that the Indians were facing. But the intelligentsia were not concerned about the feudal chiefs. That story is over. That is over. The intelligentsia were talking about their own privileges. They were barristers, they were lawyers, they were teachers, they were some industrialists. They were concerned about their participation to have something in the Indian administration. And even if you are critical of British rule for being a foreign rule, please appreciate the fact that the British gave one economy, one political system with variations within it, an administrative and legal system, an education system which we are all inheritors of. Yet India was not free. And because India was not free, Indians suffered discrimination on many fronts. And I'm not going into the details of the discrimination. But Indians petitioned the government for what they considered their legitimate rights, and they agitated. When these methods failed, recourse was taken to the use of violence by a section of nationalists For near 2 decades in the early part of the 19th century and into the first decades of the 20th century, violence was preached and practiced. Extremism in Indian politics then shifted towards terrorism. It moves from constitutional means to extremism to terrorism. And these are interesting chapters in Indian history which we professors used to teach our students in history. It was not as boring perhaps on lectures on education and so on. They wanted to know why there was this shift from one form of agitation to another. Several years ago, I was in Port Blair. And when you go to Port Blair, you cannot but go to the cellular jail. And walking up and down that jail, I saw inscribed thereon the names of as many martyrs and prisoners who were jailed in that cellular jail. And the regionalist in me, I was not looking for anybody from Delhi or Kolkata. I wanted to find out if there were any from Assam and from the Northeast. And I can tell you, on those stones over there, etched on the stone in this cellular jail, it's a very frightening experience you have, seeing the jail and the way the prisoners were tortured and made to live those months in the cellular jail. The lessons learned in the early part of the 20th century, by the early part of the 20th century, was that extremism and terrorism were not the ways and means to take India forward. And fortunately, at that point of time, 1915 comes Mahatma Gandhi. Fortunately, he comes in and he takes over and he gives leadership to the Indian freedom struggle from 1918, 1919 with the Rowlatt Satyagraha and other satyagrahas. The amazing thing about Gandhi is all his movements ended in failure. Whether it was the Rowlatt Satyagraha, the non-cooperation movement, the Quit India movement, cumulatively, however, it succeeded. Cumulatively, by 1946, it succeeded, and the British had to withdraw from India. Assam's contribution to these developments cannot be ignored. The Jorhat Sarvajanik Sabha 1884, followed by the Assam Association 1904, followed then by the Surma Valley Association 1906, petitioned in the manner of their mentor, the Indian National Congress. With the benefits of the new education came unease for what the middle class believed were their rightful concerns, including a wide variety of issues on immigration and constitutional progress, representation in local bodies in the Assam legislature. Not much concerned about the aristocracy and the sepoys or even their religion, the educated middle class spoke of tea garden laborers and their pitiable conditions. There is a text which was published from Kolkata about the pitiable conditions in the Assam tea gardens, very interestingly, and it has not been researched fully, called Coolie Kahani. And perhaps one or two of the research scholars could work on Coolie Kahani and build around it the story of how the tea garden laborers were living in such pitiable conditions, being brought away all the way from central India. The Assamese middle class also spoke about the Assamese peasants, the wide use of opium, and the desire for an advance of education. Then, as elsewhere in India, the politics of agitation drew in large numbers to agitate against, for instance, the partition of Bengal in 1905. Even if there was an agitation in 1905 and continuing, and it petered out by 1911, 1912, it petered out. It was not so active in the Assam Valley. The Brahmaputra Valley was not that active. It was more active in the Surma / the Barak Valley. The Barak people seem to be more politically conscious than the people of the Brahmaputra Valley. If the national movement was gaining momentum in the two valleys, it was gaining momentum. There is reason to explain why it had practically no following in the hills. The British wanted to keep the hill people away from agitation, away from development. They brought in an administrative system which was indirect administration, or only allowing a semblance of administration with the hill people. They were called backward tracts. And then in 1935, they were called excluded areas and the partially excluded areas. And the governor had personal control over these areas. The hill people were kept more as museum pieces, as an anthropologist has written somewhere. Within the region also were the 25 Khasi states, under the watchful eye of the Deputy Commissioner, and he did not allow any form of agitation. Also there was Manipur, which had been controlled, and Tripura, which was a tribal state then, but today that tribal essence has been eroded. It has changed over the years. Within the region also was a small area in the Naga Hills called the unadministered tract. It's a British concept, unadministered, but it's administered by the people themselves, right? And anthropologists and others have done marvelous studies, even in these unadministered areas, to have given account of the way in which tribal people administer themselves. Modern history of India neglects Northeast. Even the ancient history of India neglects Northeast. Medieval history of India neglects the Northeast. There is a very prominent 2-volume history of India, where volume 1 has only one line on Assam, only Kamakhya and its surrounding hills, a one-liner in an ancient text, ancient Indian history text. There is very little on the Turks and their advance into Assam, or on the Mughal history. There is nothing, for instance, in our Indian history text to show that the Ahoms were the longest reigning monarchy in India, 600 years, beating the Mauryas, beating the Kushans, beating all the other empires. It was the Ahoms. That doesn't feature in history. When I was doing my research on historiography on the Northeast, I searched for old texts on the history of the region. And I came across Dodwell's History of India. Dodwell wrote a classic history of India. And Assam was to be included in that text, but it was not, for want of space. For want of space. And in my own research on Christianity on Northeast India, I have J.B. Firth's History of Christianity in India. No reference to Christianity in Northeast India, despite the fact that many of us, including the American historian who wrote extensively on the region, has indicated that Christianity can be traced back to the 16th and 17th century with Portuguese mercenaries. And it was left to the American historian Frederick Downes to write a small chapter as an appendix. So the history of India becomes an appendix in the other histories of India. And that's not all, my friends. Take the Cambridge Economic History of India, Volume 1. The Cambridge Economic History of India, Volume 1. That made no reference to Northeast India, as if it did not exist. And it was our dear friend Amalendu Guha who had to write
a postscript. Do you think it is good for us to know our history as appendix and postscripts? Right? It is extremely sorry that we do not do this. But the problem is that if historians from mainland India do not portray this important region, it is because we historians, we ourselves from the region, have not done this bit of taking the history of Northeast into the history of mainland India. Hopefully it will be done. What the Northeast is being written about is insurgency, is divide, is the concern of the people in other parts of India that this is an insurgent festive area. Nobody talks about, for instance, the love of the Nagas for hot chilies, right? Or for the shawls that they wear and the Arunachali tradition of giving, their best to the visitors over there. It's a beautiful place. I once asked a group of IAS officers who came to Shillong and called on me after I admitted office as chairman of UPSC. What do you love of the Northeast when you first come to the Northeast? And they said, sir, it's a lovely green region. We could not have said it better. The greenery attracted the people from these students who came and called on me. But history texts have ignored. And I would go back to the history text that we are all familiar with. Freedom struggle, for instance, has nothing to deal with the Northeast. Bipan Chandra's own history of modern India makes no reference. Sumit Sarkar's modern India only talks about the Chargola incident, where during the Chargola incident in the civil disobedience movement, there was that call for Delhi Chalo, or Gandhi Maharaj Ki Jai. But it was again the historian Amalandu Guha and my own supervisor and dear mentor DIBRU Collegge who have been able to include the history of Northeast India wherever they go for seminars and conferences in history associations. Political activity in the region was linked with the advance of the freedom struggle, and I believe I still have time. Through the Indian National Congress initially and drawn by Gandhi's call, the people of the two valleys actively participated in the freedom struggle. Gandhi made 4 visits to Assam. 4 visits to Assam. Do a Google search and you will find very interesting comments of Mahatma Gandhi's visit to Assam. He did not ignore it. And very many of the other Indian National Congress leaders did come to the region and participate in political activity. 1921 galvanized large numbers to support the non-cooperation movement. It was in the non-cooperation movement that tea garden laborers were actively agitating in Dharam and Sitsagar and also in the Barak Valley. The nationalist cause and the civil disobedience movement again ignited participants in the two valleys, particularly in reaction to the Cunningham Circular of 10th May. It drew a large number of students into the movement. And what is amazing in the Assam agitation and the freedom struggle is the role of women. Women played an extremely active role in the freedom struggle. Now, as a sociologist, which I'm not, you would find you have to explain why this was so. It talks about the society being a little different than elsewhere in India for the women in this region to have participated as actively as they did. Their agitation would continue till Gandhi's second visit to Assam in April 1934. The Congress call against India's support for the war against Germany revived agitation, 1939. There was a revival in agitation. The Quit India movement in Assam and elsewhere in India recorded sabotage to government property and large numbers were imprisoned. A recent publication by a dear friend of ours, Sheila Bora, has noted the martyrdom on 20th September 1942 of 17-year-old Kolkata Barwa. If students had to do a project on history, read up Kanaka Barba and the role that the 17-year-old girl marched to the Gopur police station with the Indian flag and tried to raise the flag atop that police station. She was shot. And she goes down in India's history as being the youngest martyr in the Quit India movement. But during that movement also, Kushal Kanwar was the only martyr of the country who was hanged during the Quit India agitation. Kanwar was implicated in a 10th December 1942 incident when a train carrying British soldiers was derailed at Sarpathar railway station in Kolkata district of the province, killing several soldiers. Kanwar was a Gandhian by nature and a follower of non-violence, was ignorant about the sabotage plan in action. He was declared guilty despite no proof against him. He met his death as martyr on 15th June 1943. So why is it that you don't have these stories being told, these histories being featured in Indian history? Is a question you and I will have to take up more aggressively and to place this history into our text. And when the war came in 1939, by 1942, the Japanese were close to Kohima and into Imphal. The soldiers were pushing up the Japanese. You have the Nagas and the Lushai scouts against the Japanese plans to enter India from the north. It was at this time also that the Azad Hindfauds attempted to march to Delhi with the call Delhi Chalo. And there was excitement, if I may say. There was not much of joining up the Azad Hindfauds, but large numbers were sympathizers with Subhash Chandra Bose. And you find these supporters in Assam, the Khasi Hills, Manipur, and even in Tripura. If I have said that the hill areas did not participate in political activity, you do get the stirrings of political activity starting eventually. It started with the Jaintia Darbar, 1900. This was followed by many of the tribes sending their labor corps to France. The Lushai labor corps, the Garo, the Khasi, the Jaintia, the Naga labor corps were recruited by the British because the war didn't seem to end. And they took
a labor corps all the way from northeast India to France to support the war effort. Very many died. And you get the Garos commemorating that event. The Khasis have forgotten that event until a film was made but recently. The Naga Club was established in 1918. The Khasi National Darbar was set up in 1923 and the Federation of Khasi States 1934. Garos were brought into political activity in 1946. Just before independence, they get very active in wanting to know what their future would be. And the Mizos were similar in the start of a Mizo Union in April 1846. During the last years of British rule, the British attempted to divide, to segregate, and to further keep away the hill tribes of northeast India from participating in association with the mainland India. This has featured in a book of mine which Principal Borogohain elaborated in his introduction, in a book of mine which I have termed On the Edge of Empire. I have termed the book On the Edge of Empire because the plan, the Crown Colony or the Protectorate plan, was on the edge in time as also in space. Northeast being between mainland India and Burma. And the British wanted to take advantage of this, to isolate the hill people and not to give them a participation in India's freedom and whatever would come. It was ill-timed. It could not take shape. And I have, in a very elaborate publication of mine, been able to show that even Burma flirted with the plan. Dorman Smith, the governor of Burma, through 42, 43, 44, flirted with the pan so that parts of Burma and India could come together into a crown colony like Basutoland and Swaziland. Basutoland and Swaziland in South Africa. I'll now come to the conclusion, and some of you must be exhausted by now. Right? I'm not exhausted because, as teachers, we stand up and we enjoy presentations like this. But I hope it has been interesting. 3 weavings I've done. First, mutiny. Second, national movement. Third, integration, right? We weave things together and we give you a picture of what the past was. These hills and plains were placed between the larger Indian culture to the west and its links with South Asia towards the east. And I've been able to see over history, and because of a British connect, that Northeast India was increasingly getting aligned with mainland India, which is to the west, to the neglect of its east. And even today you find very little really happening between the people of Northeast India and Southeast Asia, where they have cultural, linguistic, historical links. That seems to be dying, that seems to be fading away. And I have to be very candid about it. It's becoming dim. This came as a consequence of their changed administrative position within the colonial state and their participation in the national movement of which mention has been made. These developments stimulated the integrative principle with the culture, politics, and administration of the Northeast with the Indian state. I will now take you to a discussion of the events just prior to independence. 2 events, just 2 events. The history is so complex. You have so much of material. We historians have to sieve out from the past and to take out what is significant in my presentation. But what is significant in my presentation may not be significant to somebody else's presentation. And therefore we have varieties of history. But there were 2 events. Just before independence, the Muslim League made a demand over Assam, made a demand over the Khasi, Jaintias, Garo, and the Lushai Hills, also the Santal Parganas. And I have in my note over here, which I will, if necessary, have it given to the college, if it's going to be published at all, a correspondence from R. Hassan of the Calcutta District Muslim League, writing to Muhammad Ali Jinnah, saying that the Northeast and Assam should be included in Pakistan. And the cabinet mission, please believe me, the cabinet mission almost fell for it, and divided India into A, B, and C categories of states. And C category of states would have resulted in much of Northeast India going to Pakistan, until Gopinath Bordoloi, Premier of Assam, stood firm, went to the Indian National Congress and said, I want a resolution passed in the Indian National Congress that Assam should be part of India. And consequently, that resolution was passed, and the cabinet mission was not able to take forward that demand of the Muslim League. You can imagine the consequences if it had happened, right? But we historians don't ask those questions, neither do we seek to answer them, right? We just stop short at what the past was, and we leave it up to your imagination to take things forward. The other question was, what should be Assam's policy towards the hill people? We have seen in history that Assam never really had a tribal policy, and there are research indicating a tribal policy, but there was never a complete control over the hill areas. For whatever reason, the Assamese rulers, maybe because they were tribals themselves in the origin, kept away from the hill areas and allowed the hill areas to operate on their own genius. Sir Andrew Clow, the last British governor of Assam, understood a very delicate position of an Assam tribal relationship. And he mentions just before his departure for Scotland and leaving Assam as the last of the British governors, he said, "Assam is never likely to be as homogeneous as other provinces. The plains people are not so divided as those of the hills, but they are far from being a single people such as can be found in many equally large or larger parts of India. But this great collection of peoples in hills and plains have been set in a particular well-demarcated corner of the world, and their welfare will depend on their proving able to live together." Right? They have to prove to live together. Assam should look to her diversity and to her capacity for toleration, which is greater than that of other provinces, to provide her strength. But soon after partition, soon after the transfer of power, members of the Constituent Assembly began to raise up in the Constituent Assembly through words such as, "The British mind is still there. There is the old separatist tendency, and you want to keep them away from us," said one legislator, member of the Constituent Assembly. Another said, "We want to assimilate the tribal people. We were never given the opportunity so far." And they were perhaps disrespectful of J.J.M. Nicholsroy, who was also a member of the Constituent Assembly. Many years earlier, J.J.M. Nicholsroy had used the word in a publication he referred to "we Assamese." So he subsumed his Khasi identity when he said "we Assamese." But this was not appreciated, perhaps. The tribals did not want to be assimilated in this fashion. It would not be long before the cordial relations between the Assamese and the hill people would be tested. And I need not go into the details of the language issue and the emergence of states that came in 1962, 63, and 70. I've reached the conclusion. And the conclusion is that there is an unhappy state of not projecting the history of the Northeast. And this unhappy state should be repaired by historians who should include the history of not only the freedom struggle, but nationalism and the integrative principle into the history of Northeast India. For instance, there is no record of the migration of peoples into the Northeast. And you young students and postgraduate students over here would know that in this total neglect, there is no reference to the Ahoms or to the Khasis. Believe me, the Khasis were had migrated into the region much before the Ahoms. The Nagas perhaps had come in much before, because when the Ahoms come in, they make reference to some of the tribes who are already there. And the Khasis were up in their hills, going back into antiquity, The saving grace in all this is our understanding of the past has come from scholars of the region. Many scholars of the region are die-hard nationalists, but also die-hard regionalists. We want to take up a history of the region. For instance, Professor Sri Datta and I are members of the Northeast India History Association. So when we study the history of India, we study not Indian history as such, but the history of Northeast India. We are insular in our way, but we want our history texts to be read by historians elsewhere, and then to to piece together that history into Indian texts. It is happening. It is happening. After 40 years, we are finding much of our effort really taking shape. It's been a pleasure coming to DIBRU College. It's been a pleasure having such a responsive and very alert audience, despite my 1-hour lecture that I've given. Thank you very much. Kublai Shibon.
That was indeed an extraordinary lecture. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your deep knowledge with us. Your lecture covering various aspects of the freedom struggle in Northeast India was thought-provoking and undoubtedly insightful and valuable. We might have people from among the audience who would want to interact with sir, and if we do have, we have kept maximum 15 minutes for interaction. So if you have any people who would want to interact with sir. No, really.
My dear friend, Prof. Syiemlieh, respected faculty members, and my dear students. Actually, I am very happy in the sense that Professor Syiemlieh has come to my own place. My house is only 200 meters from here. So I am really very happy. This is practically my college, my city. I am one of the citizens of Dibrugarh. I am thankful to, especially to the principal and the faculty members for inviting certain eminent historian to address us and also particularly the students. Today they have come to know what is history practically and how we have been neglected in the main history of India. Now, so far, this theme is concerned that mutiny, freedom struggle, and integration. I don't know whether this theme has been selected by my friend himself or has been given by the college with slight reservation on the word mutiny. Rest of the things I fully agree. I really think that this is a very lengthy subject, and in Assamese one kahabat is there, one saying is there, Hati Mari Bhurukat Bhorua. It is such an extensive subject, and my friend has done real justice to the subject. Hati Mari Bhurukat Bhorua means actually killing an elephant and try to, I don't know what is the exact meaning of Bhuruka in English, I don't know, but bamboo, a bamboo kind of things, and killing an elephant and trying to insert the entire elephant there. And it is almost like that you have done a very impossible job possible. Whatever it may be, I am practically with you in the sense that in spite of Assam being so many first in so many things, for example, even before mutiny of 1857, we are fortunate enough to have Pioli Borua and also Gamodhar Kaur to be the first people of Assam to revolt in entire India against the Britishers. That is really a glory for us. And in other, so 1942 to Quit India movement is concerned, our Pioli Phukon is the first martyr, only martyr, in the entire movement of 1942, to earn such a glory, such a laudable things to the entire people of the Northeast. So really, when we were students of history and we generally visited the other parts of India, say for example, I visited Nalanda University, invited to deliver something on Buddhism. There are so many eminent scholars from all over India, and also all over India and outside India, they were there. When we presented a paper on Buddhism in Northeast India, they said that, is it there? Buddhism is there in the Northeast. I say, not there. It is a living Buddhism is there. I very emphatically inserted, and then only those people who are coming from different parts of the world, they came to know actually Assam is, Northeast is having a very glorious history of Buddhism. So because of that, I think my friend, along with our teachers, that H.K. Borpajaji, most respected historian, so he founded an organization that is Northeast India History Association. And with our friend Reid Syiemlieh, who was General Secretary for a number of years, practically founder, after J.B. Bhattacharya, you were the General Secretary, and after that, I also there for 6 years. We made a tiring effort to carve on through that this association, which we started only with 25 members. While we attended Mizoram session or Impulse session, only 20 people are there. Our wives, prevented us. Don't go there, full of dangers. So we were escorted, from front and the back to attend the sessions. That way, we created a very big organization in the entire Northeast that is known as Northeast India History Association. We started with 20 members. Now 1,500 live members are there. Why I have mentioned this? Because there is a pang of some kind of sadness in our hearts that we are being neglected. In spite of our Himalayan contribution, we are being neglected by the mainland historians. That's why we made an effort, and today you will be happy to know that historians from Bangladesh, from Japan, from Germany, from Great Britain, from America, they are members there, and they have come to know that really the Northeast has a tremendous contribution, Himalayan contribution in the history and civilization of India. So that is really a very interesting subject, and we should be proud of our ancestors. They did a lot, and so also we should do a lot for the enrichment of history and culture. One thing I like so far here, this hill-plain relationship is concerned. I have written a number of papers, very key papers also somewhere in one college. I inaugurated, I was asked to give a keynote address there. There, people were surprised to know that in the entire Ahom rule, which is one of the second longest rule in the world, next to the Roman Empire, second longest rule, 600 years. So in 600 years, we are having only 60 classes with the hill tribes of only 60 minor classes, with the hill tribes of Northeast India. But just after independence in 30 to 40 years, the number of classes are more than 500. This is the thing. That means our policy of the Ahom rulers were extensively good, very cordial. That's why it didn't happen. They have taken all the constructive roles to open markets on the border, to have different officers, like Saudia Khwa to deal with the officials, or the tribal people. This way, we maintain our best. Somewhere we have committed mistake. Our governments have committed mistake. So this thing is there. We hope, like the organizations like Northeast India History Association and the other organizations will certainly play a very important role to establish a very cordial relationship in between the hills and the plains. I am really thankful to my friend that he has come all the way from Shillong, because we just, a week back, we were working incessantly for 3 days in the Northeast India History Association 40th session. And that session, we were busy day and night because 160 papers were presented there, not a matter of joke. So both of us were very busy there. And then he said that I'm going to DIBRU. I said that I'm busy in a high-level committee meeting where I am a member, which is dealing with Assam Accord 6, clause number 6 implementation. I said that if I am fortunate, I shall meet you in Dibrugarh. I was fortunate, and so I have met in Dibrugarh. I am again thankful to principal and to all my learned colleagues of DIBRU College, and also my student friends, who have given us a chance to listen to a very learned lecture given by Professor Reid Syiemlieh. I have taken some time more because of banking upon your friendship. Thank you very much.
To Pakistan, and I gave you the documentation for it, and the credit goes to Gopinath Bordoloi for that. When I talked about the integration of the hills, it was an integration into Assam as an Indian state. I'm very much aware that the question of integration is still a live issue with what happened in 1947-48 in the transfer and annexation of Indian states into the Indian Union. Tripura very quietly integrated. Manipur has even today some issues. The Khasis are still raising up the issue of integration. But I think steps have been taken, whether it is an emotive integration, whether it is a political, constitutional, these issues have been put in place these days. And I think the test of the Indian Constitution has stood its ground, and we must appreciate the way in which the integration process has happened. There's a lot to be done. It is too recent. 1947 for me as a historian is too recent, and I have to get back into my documentation, and therefore I very selectively wove these threads together in a connection between mutiny, national movement, and integration. As for my senior friend, Professor Sri Siddhar, the topic was mine. I've given I had talked about I've given some portions of these lectures in Osmania University. But in Osmania University, as I was explaining to friends yesterday, most of those who came to attend my lecture were worried whether I would were concerned or happy, let me say, if I was talking on the Indian the UPSC, the Union Public Service Commission. And if some of you, let me still have one or two questions on my topic, and then if you wish to ask me some questions on encouraging you in the civil service, I'm here for that, because I've retired, right? I'm a free man these days. Any more questions?
Sir,
yes.
I'm Chandan Kumar Sharma from DIBRU University. Sir, two quick questions. One,
too many, is it?
Two quick questions.
Two, okay.
Yes, sir. Mutiny, 1857. 1857 was also known for establishment of universities. Establishment of universities.
They came before that.
1857. Sir.
Yes.
1857 is known for universities. So can we have an alternative kind of a narrative? Universities, freedom struggle, and integration.
Well, I was not talking about education as such. I'm
not talking about your presentation, sir. Just
yes.
We all have some kind of a fixation to understand 1857 only in terms of the mutiny.
Yes.
But when you speak in terms of multifaceted impact, perhaps greater impact were done by the universities. So perhaps a different kind of imagination. Universities, freedom struggle, and integration. It is just an alternative kind of imagination, okay. Sir. Next one. You were talking about that crown colony, and the book you had edited that on the edges of the empire, which speaks about 4 or 5 different plans: Coupland plan, Reid plan. Do you think there was some kind of a direct inspiration when there were questioning the whole process of integration from Nagaland to Mizoram? My question is, all those different plans which were coming up in 1940s, did they somehow, somewhere inspire what was happening in Nagaland or in Mizoram, which directly questioned the very process of integration? That's it, sir.
These plans were made in 1941 with Reid, and it ended in 1945 with Andrew Clow, the 2 large plans. Much before the Naga situation, much before the Lisai situation. They were talking about the hill people and how they should be administered and to give them local governance. If you go through them, you would find most of them were attractive towards the way the tribal people administered themselves and wanted local administration to be encouraged. So the Naga situation was still not even in its infancy. The Lushai situation was only with one issue, which was the issue of the Naga chiefs. There was an agitation just before independence, right, where the Lals had the misuse of certain powers, and then the Mizo people stopped them from having that. So the British did not really look into the agitation of the hill people and encourage them. It's a misnomer. It is a misnomer. Yes. About university, I will add one line more, because when I was talking about one unifying force, one language, one legal system, I will also talk about the establishment of universities, 1857, of Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta universities. Right. I will add that on. Yes, there's a young student.
Yes, sir. I have one question over here. Okay.
Can we encourage this young student to, yes. Yes, yes, we are.
Hello. Sir, good afternoon, and thank you for your insightful speech. Sir, my question is, as you have already given us enough of knowledge about how the role of Northeast has been evident into the freedom struggle of India and into the integration and during the mutiny period, why do you think historians or history of India has always neglected Northeast?
Please, is there a follow-up after that or anything else? Just that?
Pardon, sir?
Is that your question?
Yes, sir.
Right. If you sit, and I would immediately tell you. In history, we talk about the significant. In history, we talk about the significant. And for the historians of the Northeast, it is significant for us to go back to our own roots and to our culture and to our politics, and we want to write about our own histories. But histories of mainland India, when they look at Northeast, do not consider the Northeast significant, right? It is insignificant. I had a line in my work, frankly, let me tell you, I did a lot of editing to conform to making this interest. There was a historian in our Northeast India History Association who says that perhaps mainland India has not looked upon Northeast India because it is considered insignificant. It is considered insignificant. Historians have to bring out a participation of Northeast in it. But if Bipan Chandra is writing his freedom struggle and he doesn't see it significant enough, then he will not include it, right? You will find Amalendu Guha doing it because he makes a connect between the region and mainland India, and he has a wider perspective. But as I've already said, I've done a critique on ourselves in the sense that historians from the region have not written on Indian history. We've been very, very insular. And it would be encouraging that a good historian from the region do take up the presentation of the history of Northeast into Indian history, right? It will happen in time, and I'm sure. I'm looking around at young teachers from the Northeast who are in Delhi University, Pondicherry, they're in Banaras Hindu University, and you're getting in the last 20 years a whole group of historians, sociologists, anthropologists who are moving from good universities in the Northeast and good universities elsewhere in India and fanning out throughout India and teaching. In the next 15, 20 years, I do see an incorporation of the history of the region into it. But when I gave this, for instance, in Loreto College on periodization, I gave a lecture at Calcutta many years ago. They said a similar situation is with Garhwal or Sikkim. Now, there's also a neglect there. So how much can you involve? How much can you put in, right? We don't want to load our histories. We have to significantly keep this significant in our histories. Thank you for raising up a question. Any more?
Sir, here.
Where's that? Okay.
Sir, I'm Lalbek Thangrangkol from DIBRU University, Department of History. Since you retired from policy makers, as a policy maker, so I will throw a little bit questions from that point of angles. Sir, why is the government, whenever government changes, there is restrictions of writing of new history in their own versions? So in that way, you know, history has been written. If you take a look, trace the history of 2004, since then many versions of history has been rewritten and still continuously processed. So, but then again, we also found that even despite rewritten history, Northeast history has not figured out. Even in the curricular courses like CBCS, also in NCERT books, we didn't find any reference to the history of Northeast as such. Also, why do we need to convince them to, you know, enforce our own history in that national curricular courses? So why government have not any kind of receptive things to conform or agree to portray our history in that. Thank you.
I see you have raised up two issues. One, why is there a rewriting of history? There's a political agenda to put a particular idea across. And through 47 into the present day, we are finding one group after another, one political platform or another being used for use or abuse of history. And we have to be extremely careful when history is abused and the context in which history was there in the past is not being, At some stage I wrote a paper on historiography and I used a very ancient text to identify history as what was. Now, if you add to what was, then you don't get history. And the Indian Council of Historical Research tried its best to patch up together a whole context of history, but it was identified as being a particular orientation. And you're getting a very dangerous trend coming into our history text these days, where things that did not happen in the past are being incorporated into our history. The least said, the better. The least said, the better. But we must be courageous enough, if we are holding positions, to take up the challenge that the history of the Northeast be included. For instance, in the Indian Council of Historical Research, where I was a member, I made it absolutely clear that the Northeast must be funded to the extent of 10% of the grants of the ICHR. And I made a point also in the ICSSR that a similar funding of research should be there. That has been watered down these days. Also, I do remember going to IGNU for updating one of their syllabus. And I'm only one among many others perhaps who have done it. But there is not that will. That will seems to be lacking to include. It's not now the significance, it's not the insignificant, it is the will. And we have to get across that will to involve the incorporation of the Northeast into history. Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Just past 12 o'clock.
Yeah, good noon, sir. I'm not don't have any background of, I know history, but I'm not a person from history. I'm involved in trying to impart quality education in a very small junior college here. Yes, and then I heard a famous name during a lecture, Moniram Dewan.
Moniram Dewan.
And Moniram Dewan, I hope the people of DIBRU knows that he was staying in Amlapati railway gate. He was here. He's got his traditional house there. And Assam company, when he was developing it from Amlapati Chajali. Now the question here is, then this word, come on boys, dig. Then we got his name, Dig Boy. Now we've got oil, we have got tea. Didn't these wonderful commercial things which the country has developed, didn't mainland China ever think of this? Mainland India, I'm sorry. The question is, how can history neglect such economical developments?
Economic development.
Yes. It's history, sir. I can't believe it. The India, the mainland India, how could it reject? We cannot even think of Assam.
Thank you. Economic history is an important facet of history, but it has definitely been neglected. I must say it. And there's only a genre of history and only a group of historians who take delight in presenting economic history. It is a little more difficult than doing social history, but it means, here's again, we're going into a new development of, for instance, the tea industry. It definitely needs much more attention that has been done. You have Percival Griffiths, the Indian tea industry. You have Dharma Kumar's Cambridge Economic History of India. But you do need to have much more from our universities and the college to make a presentation of economic events. As for Maniram Diwan, I would suggest we go more into local history. There is something in our history where we have neglected the locality. The small localities, the smaller issues, these need to be incorporated. But you must also ensure that you will have readers for these histories. But thank you for your question or your information that you provided. No, I think if there's one, there's two more. Yeah, there's.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes.
Yes. So I am a student from Humanities. Solbrook Academy. So I have a very basic question to you. Like, as you said, our Northeast history, or more prominently, I would say, Assam history is neglected. So how, from your point of view, what should the modern society, like the representatives of the modern era, should do in order to make it significant in the history of Northeast? What should the modern society do? Like representatives like us, what should we do to contribute to make Northeast a significant part of the Indian history?
Okay. I think what needs to be done to encourage you young students is that your textbooks in school need to have more of history, but history has been neglected. It has been sidelined. History has been sidelined amongst the social sciences, and they're definitely, we're all the poorer for it. But you yourself have said that you prefer, or you give emphasis to the history of Assam. You have to be large enough in your heart to mention the Northeast, right? Assam is very focal in the Northeast, but if you say only Assam, then you neglect what once I used the term periphery. And then I quickly deleted periphery because I felt it was not right that the hills should be looked upon as periphery, right? The hills are central. I must give you an interesting incident that occurred several years ago. I was in Pinewood Hotel where there was a meeting of the Northeast Council. And I was waiting for a school friend of mine who had come from Sikkim, because Sikkim had just been included in the Northeast. Sikkim had been included in the Northeast. Anyway, you can understand my giggle over there. Anyway, and to this couch came a participant, and sitting on that couch, the person, I won't tell you the gender, said, "Shillong is so far away." And I listened very carefully. And I said, and let me go back to the gender. I said, "Madam, so is Delhi." So is Delhi. I mean, you have to have an understanding of incorporating the region and being sensitive. Just the other day, there was a WhatsApp message, and I'm not into WhatsApp much, but I got a message showing that the Indian Air Force was wanting to display the type of jet that bombed the Khasi Hills in the 1950s. Now, if that type of machine is going to be put on display in Silchar, which is so close to Aizawl, which was used to bomb the Lushais in that armed resistance there, it just shows the insensitivity of people. But thank you, young man, for your question. One more.
Good afternoon, sir.
Oh, sir, yes.
Sir, you have mentioned about the T-types condition when they were brought here. Would you say that when the British brought the laborers from the Middle India, it was a trickier form of slavery system, or that sort of? And my second question is, the British discriminated us, and do you think we also have discriminated the T-types community, and there's still discrimination present here among each other?
Okay. My young friend, I did not use the word slavery. I used the word laborers. I was very respectful for them, even if they are, the term was not slavery for them, it was tea garden laborers. And they were discriminated in a very profound way. But they themselves could not react. After all, they come from a strata of society where they did not have leadership to bring them up in a presentation of their woes. I'm not too sure about the second question, but what was the second question? Just elaborate. Huh? Oh yes, there have been discrimination, and we would not want that discrimination to continue. Right, I think I've answered that. No, the mic could be, go back to the, I've answered that question.
Sir, the first question that you have answered, I have asked that is it a trickier form of slavery system that the British used on the...
It was more of a system called indenture. You go to Wikipedia, and if Wikipedia can answer your question, go into indenture system and find out how from India many people were taken to Philippines, to Maldives, to Seychelles, and even into the Northeast into a pattern of labor contract called indenture, right? It was close to slavery, as one writer says. It was close to slavery. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
One more.
So I'm from Dr. Radhakrishnan School of Arts, Commerce and Science.
Arts?
Commerce and Science. So I have a specific question that if all this mutiny have given us integrity among the people, then why is...
Keep it a little away. Yes, now you can speak.
Okay. Then...
Yeah.
If all this mutiny have given us integrity among the people, then why is the need, then why is, we can see the demand for a separation from the mainland. Was the integration was not achieved?
It's not very clear. If we are talking about mutiny and integration, why separation? Yeah. Separation, which group are you talking about for
About the terrorists.
Pardon?
Terrorists.
Yeah.
You
have to be very specific. History is extremely specific. Don't evade anything. If you wish to talk about separation, then you have to identify which group you were talking about. It's a very generic term you are using, right? In history, you have to be much more specific. So which group? Ponder over these issues. I give you credit for standing up and putting a question, but whenever you're putting a question, be extremely careful on how you present your okay. You can stop after this. But
Sir.
Yes.
Alpha.
Oh, Alpha. I'm not too up on that topic, you know. There's lots to be done, and I wish one of the things that I have is hope. Human beings are good human beings, and ultimately peace will prevail. And we can see a process where, and I've talked about it, whenever you have a movement which is using force and terrorism and these forces ultimately do not succeed. Go to the Polish agitation of Lech Walesa. Please sit. Go into a history of the Polish agitation for their state post-1947, and it was led by a port worker called Lech Walesa. They used force. They wanted force to get things done in the Polish state. He was influenced by Gandhi, and that Gandhian influence on him brought about a whole change in the Polish agitation, and he eventually became Prime Minister, or was it President of Lech Walesa, of Poland. Look at the way also things have happened in South Africa. So there's a tremendous influence from India of whatever India experienced in its agitation. It was the longest movement, but it was a successful movement. Thank you again.
Good afternoon, sir. Besides from all this topic, I would like to ask some about the UPSC. as you can, because you were the former chairman of UPSC, that's why.
Yes, you haven't asked your question as yet.
Some advices, how to approach and all.
Work hard, graduate, choose your subjects carefully, and face the interview with confidence. Face the interview with confidence, right? I had a very interesting candidate who visited me. He's an SP, Superintendent of Police of one of the districts in Assam. And he was on my board, and I had interviewed him along with the other members for the position that he presently holds. It is a wonderful experience. And he said, sir, I have learnt much from that interview. So you first have to graduate, choose your topics carefully, and face the interview with not overconfidently. Please sit. It is the most tough examination anywhere in the world. 12 lakh to 15 lakh students apply for it. 40,000 finish the prelims. Then they do the mains examination. 3,000 come to do the interview, which is held over 2 months, for the love of 1,000 or 800 positions with the government of India. When you take the number who apply and then succeed, but it is possible. It is possible. And I'll tell you a very interesting story of a blind candidate who came to the UPSC, finished the prelims, finished the mains, came for the interview, and I was happy she came to my board, and she was an exceptionally fine candidate, and she got the job. I think she's in the Foreign Service, Indian Foreign Service. Now, a blind girl. The happy news is that she's even got married but recently, and I was informed. So I do keep her track. Do remember that also the first position in the UPSC 3 or 4 years ago was a lady who was physically challenged. Physically challenged people. So people with disabilities, gender, these issues do not, are of no consideration in the man. It is your preparation, it is your ability to be a good civil servant. There is a new inclusion in the course, which is you have to have the aptitude to be a civil servant, an aptitude to be a civil servant. One more.
Sir, myself, Swapnanil Sharma Barua. Sir, I just want to know a view about the topic. Sir, Citizenship Amendment Bill, which has been a very.
I have come not to talk about the Citizenship Amendment Bill, but I have come to talk about this, and I have agreed to go into a topic of the Public Service Commission. But I will listen to you. Tell me.
Okay, sir. Sir, I want to know that if that bill is passed, how will that affect the integration process of that national integration process? What's your view about that? How will that affect?
My dear Chief Minister of Meghalaya, please sit. My dear Chief Minister of Meghalaya was a person who's spearheading the issue which you raised, and I will consult and advice from him as to how I should reply to issues raised up by candidates like you. Okay. It is a very live issue. And when parliamentarians or policy makers bring in legislation, they have to be extremely careful that it is right in the eyes of law. Not only right in the eyes of law, right with a sensitivity to the people whom it will affect. I'm very careful in the words I use. I have to be politically correct given the position that I hold. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, interactive audience. I know when we have a person like Professor Syiemlieh, who is an institution in himself and who possesses an ocean of wisdom and knowledge, we may have many questions coming in our mind to ask him. But if we do, we'll make an arrangement later so that you can still interact with him. Now we would like to stick to our scheduled time. But before I move to the last part of this event, may I request all of you to stand up to give a standing ovation and a thunderous applause to our Chief Speaker, Professor David Reid Syiemlieh. Thank you very much. We are gradually moving towards the end of this program, and now I would like to take the privilege to offer the vote of thanks. At the very outset, I, on behalf of IQAC DIBRU College, would like to offer our vote of thanks to our respected principal, Dr. Jitu Buragohai, who has helped us in all ways possible to organize this event, right from the beginning till this moment. I offer my gratitude to Professor Syiemlieh, who has not only accepted our invitation to grace this event as the speaker, but has also taken the pains to prepare a truly resourceful lecture. DIBRU College has been honored by your presence, sir. Special thanks to Dr. Kwendarisa Kharbuli of Nehu, Shillong for her immense help. I thank the distinguished guests who took the time out of the busy schedule to attend this lecture and made this a success. I offer my thanks to my dear students who have attended this lecture, and I hope all of you have benefited from it. I would be failing in my duties if I do not thank the very active DIBRU College Students Union and the NCC cadets of this college. Last, but definitely not the least, I offer heartfelt thanks to each and every member of the DIBRU College family for their active support in organizing this event and for making DIBRU College Annual Lecture 2019 a truly successful one. Thank you, everybody. May I now request our principal, sir, and Professor Syiemlieh to join the audience. I request everyone to stand up for the state anthem. I request the audience to please be seated wherever you are. We have very light refreshment coming up to you.